If you could burn thorium and uranium and do it at prices competitive with coal, you could deliver US levels of power consumption to everyone on the planet for 1,000 years. Just think how you'd think differently about the world if you could deliver US levels of power consumption to everyone on the planet for 1,000 years. And that's possible in these technologies, though unproven. And that's what got me so interested in it, because it cuts through the Gorgon knot of 2 billion people out of poverty and containing the environmental impact, if in fact you can solve it. So now I want to talk to you as the John Heinz Professor of Management Practice and Environmental Management, the world's longest job title. And I want to talk to you about the problems of nuclear energy and about having to think about nuclear energy, again, as one of the tools in mankind's kit of trade in dealing with how do you get 2 billion people or so out of poverty, and how do you contain the environmental impact of that move. With us today, out of the goodness of his heart, is Ray Rothrock. Ray's venture capitalist of repute, was one of the primary players at Venrock in the Valley for years. Ray has the unique distinction of not only being a Harvard MBA class of 88, but also is a nuclear engineering trained MBA from Texas A&M and from MIT. And it's one of the few of our tribe that has actually worked in the field and run a reactor and done all those things.
So we're not going to invest in anything that requires subsidies, because subsidies often go away. We're going to invest in things that can scale, because scale will win. And you have to keep in mind that whatever technologies you invest in, you're competing in a commodity market. Electricity is commodities, oil is commodity, sunlight's a commodity. So in normal venture capital investments, look for big spreads, right? So I can have high pricing and have big margins and all that. That was not true in energy, and I think a lot of people got their head handed to them. But I had a fun time in my career. One of the things I want to point out in some of Joe's graphs, we have 100 plants in the United States. I think it's maybe 99 now. They're going to go away in 25 years. That's the largest significant contribution to CO2 is the loss of those nuclear plants in the United States, in the world. Innovations are in hand. We have this country has a history with 50 different reactor designs. Joe alluded to one. There are 50 of them out there. These things were tested, run, shut down. Back in the 50s, an admiral named Rickover made a decision to build submarines run by power plants based on uranium. And he picked water. And that pushed everything towards water. And for the longest time, back actually the 40s and the 50s, uranium water-cooled plants was what it was all about. And so the whole system sort of focused on that. It was a great decision, a powerful decision, but it left a lot of good ideas in the dust, which is where we are today. Entrepreneurs are willing and able. So universities are full of grad students. I am stunned. When I was a nuclear engineer back in the early 70s, Texas A&M, there were 50, I had graduated with 53 guys. Texas A&M today has 500 students in their nuclear engineering department. Why? It's all about climate change. I've been down there, I've talked to these students. They don't necessarily stick to nuclear, but they get the understanding, the principles and so forth. But a lot of them are going overseas, India and China as a matter of fact. But the universities are full of grad students interested in this. Again, climate change is a big driver. Well, is risk capital willing and able? Well, it turns out it is. I did a little study with some guys in Washington. There's presently over $1 billion private dollars invested in nuclear energy in this country today, in North America today. $1 billion. I had no idea it was that much money. I've got a list here in a minute. And then sponsorship. Well, the financial sponsorship is quite limited. The regulatory sponsorship, you would say, well, that's the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and it's a problem. And utilities, they're hungry for power. Low, cheap, clean power. There's mandates to make it clean. And of course, they're in a commodity market, so low cost wins. That's what you got to have. So the path to success is it clear? Is it risk adjusted? Not in the United States. As Joe alluded, in China, they sort of push some democratic elements out of the way to do their nuclear program. So we concluded at Venrock in the 2000s that nuclear was ripe for disruption. And I was slightly biased being a nuclear guy, but let me just assure you that I'm not just only nuclear. I have 23 kilowatts of solar on my house. I made the investment. My electric bill went to 0. This is where it started. So the Blue Ribbon Commission was fun because I learned a lot about where our country was in nuclear. The movie addressed the issues on the table. And so coming out of the movie, a bunch of us got together at my house in March of 2013. Joe Skyped in for that meeting. And we assembled this group called Nuclear Reimagined. And we said, okay, well, let's figure out what's going on. Clearly, we got to get the NRC involved. Clearly, we got to get the Hill involved. So some of these names you may know, but we came to Washington twice. On the second trip, we were received with open arms. Unbelievable. Just unbelievable. And in fact, 2 weeks from Monday, the White House is convening a private session on nuclear energy. Me and many other people were involved, about 35 of us. But it was, so if you go back to 2010, it's been a 5-year effort. If you go to 2013, which is kind of when we organized ourselves, it's been a 2-year effort. So in 2 years, we've gotten the White House, including the president, to acknowledge that nuclear is there. We've gotten the DOE to put nuclear into the nation's energy plants, which weren't there beforehand, believe it or not. Nuclear wasn't even discussed in what this thing's called the QER, the Quadrennial Energy Review. We've got industry players who are interested. I've talked to, I don't know, half a dozen nuclear utility CEOs, from John Rowe to Tom Fanning to Tony Early and others. They're interested as customers, so it seems like everything's coming together. The one thing that's holding us back is the NRC. And the NRC is not capable of licensing things. I could spend 30 minutes on why the NRC is not capable of licensing things outside of water. But Chairman Burns, who's the current chairman of the NRC, is personally engaged. It's on his agenda, and we are working with him to come up with new regulatory framework. If you go to the NRC and you want to build a power plant, they will tell you that your reactor building has to be 13 feet thick and have this kind of capacity and stuff. Why? It doesn't make sense if you've got an atmospheric pressure power plant rather than a 2,500 PSI power plant. It doesn't make any sense, but yet that's the way the regs are written. So we have to undo that in order to do it right.
If you take the EIA's numbers, and again, I think you'd find very little difference, and compare the 2010 actual with the 2040 forecast by country, by source of energy. And again, this is all kinds of energy. You see the United States is primarily forecasted to build its economy around increasing uses of natural gas. That comes directly from the innovations in drilling and in production associated with shale gas and tight oil in North America. And that's been a remarkable and unexpected innovation. It says in China, there are going to be many forms of energy developed, but by far the largest component of that is coal. And by the way, there's even more coal being used there because there are actually old plants being shut down and new coal plants going into production, which are more efficient. So it actually understates the amount of physical building activity you would think that's there, because there's a lot of replacement activity. People talk about solar is really important in China, wind is really important in China, and the answer is no, it's not. By the way, the country that has the best understanding of the costs of building solar and the cost of building wind are India and China. And these are their forecasts. These are econometric forecasts that are then tuned by looking at actually approvals, licensed approvals for sites. So these are no longer simply computer projections. They're computer projections that people have adapted by saying, have in fact you handed out this many permits in these time frames in any event. In Europe, the energy mix is much more spread, though there's a tremendous belief that there will be a lot of wind, primarily in Germany, primarily coming out of the North Sea, brought into the economy. So each piece of the world, based on its alternatives, its weather, its physics, is making decisions. But there's one thing I don't want you to miss. The scale here ends at 300. The scale here ends at 600. And the scale here ends at 1200. China is massively more important than anything else. To some extent, it shows the growth of China